where every betrayal becomes a masterclass in justice. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that greed is thicker than blood. When the people closest to you plot your demise while you're still breathing, when they mistake your kindness for weakness, when they forget that the woman who built an empire from nothing still remembers every move in the game, that's when they discover their gravest mistake. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. These are real stories about real people who underestimated the wrong person at the wrong time. Ring that notification bell because every story we share might be the one that shows you exactly what you're capable of when pushed too far. My name is Marion Cole, and this is the story of how I taught my own daughter that some lessons come with a price that lasts forever. Sometimes the most devastating truths come from the people we trust most. I was making my afternoon tea when it happened. Earl Grey, 2 sugars, just the way I'd been drinking it for 30 years. The October rain drummed against the kitchen windows of my Vermont farmhouse, and I was humming an old song when I reached for the phone to call my daughter back. We'd been cut off mid-conversation about dinner plans, something that happened often with the spotty cell service out here. But when I picked up the receiver, I heard voices. Maggie's voice, to be exact, talking to her husband Jared. The line hadn't disconnected. It had simply gone quiet on my end while they continued their conversation, unaware that their every word was being transmitted directly into my ear. She forgot to hang up again, Maggie was saying, and I could hear the cruel amusement in her voice. Mom's such a dinosaur with technology. I froze, teacup halfway to my lips. You think she even knows what day it is half the time? Jared's voice carried that familiar tone of condescension I'd learned to recognize over the 5 years he'd been married to my daughter. She's getting worse, Maggie replied, and there was something in her voice that made my blood run cold. Not concern, not sadness, satisfaction. The medications Dr. Hendricks prescribed are supposed to help with the memory issues, but honestly, I think they're making her more confused. That's convenient, Jared said, and they both laughed. Convenient. My deteriorating mind was convenient for them. The doctor says they're slowing the decline, Maggie continued, but between you and me, I don't think they're working. She barely remembers conversations we had an hour ago. Sometimes she doesn't even remember my name. This was news to me. I remembered everything. Every conversation, every slight, every time Jared had made snide comments about my old-fashioned business practices or my outdated ideas about loyalty and family. I remembered every instance when Maggie had rolled her eyes at my suggestions or dismissed my concerns about their spending habits. How much longer do you think we have to wait? Jared asked, and something in his tone made me grip the phone tighter. Dr. Hendricks thinks maybe 2 years before she really can't function independently. But honestly, Jared, some days I look at her and I think she's already gone, you know? Like, the mom I knew is already dead, and we're just waiting for her body to catch up. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. I set my teacup down with trembling hands, afraid I might drop it. 2 years, Jared mused. That's not too bad. And once she's, well, you know, we can finally put coal industries up for sale. 2 million split between us. We'll be set for life. 2 million minimum, Maggie agreed. Maybe more if we play it right. The patents alone are worth a fortune, and the client list is gold. Mom built something incredible, even if she doesn't understand its true value anymore. I had built coal industries from nothing. 28 years ago, fresh out of my divorce from Maggie's father, I'd started with a single contract for custom software development. I'd worked 18-hour days, survived on coffee and determination, and built a company that now employed 47 people and generated millions in revenue annually. And my daughter was discussing my life's work like it was already hers. The best part, Jared continued, is that by the time we inherit everything, she won't even remember building the company. It'll be like it never mattered to her. God, Jared, Sometimes you're so dark, Maggie said, but she was laughing. Though you're probably right. Sometimes I think it would be kinder if she just forgot everything. It would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. Meaning easier for them. We just have to be patient, Maggie said. Keep encouraging her to take her medication, keep her comfortable, and wait for nature to take its course. She's 57, Jared. People her age with cognitive decline, well, let's just say we won't have to wait decades. 57 wasn't old. 57 wasn't dying. 57 was supposed to be the prime of my life, especially for a woman who'd taken care of herself, who exercised daily, who had no family history of dementia or Alzheimer's. But they were talking about me like I was already in my grave. Plus, Jared added, if her condition gets worse, we might be able to get power of attorney sooner rather than later. Then we could start making some strategic business decisions before she's completely gone. Strategic business decisions. That was code for liquidating everything I'd built. I love how your mind works, Maggie said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Mom always said I got my intelligence from her, but I think I got my ruthlessness from somewhere else entirely. They talked for another 10 minutes about their plans. How they'd reluctantly put me in a care facility when the time came. How they'd sell the farmhouse along with the business. How they'd use the money to travel the world and finally live the life we deserve. The life they deserved. Built on the ashes of mine. When they finally hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the rain and feeling something inside me shift fundamentally. It wasn't heartbreak, that was too small a word for what I felt. It was recognition. Clarity. The absolute understanding that the people I'd loved and trusted most in the world saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. I walked to the window and looked out at the rolling hills of Vermont, at the land I'd bought with my first big contract, at the home I'd built with my own hands after the divorce. 40 acres of peace and privacy, surrounded by maple trees that turned brilliant red every October, just like now. Maggie had grown up here. She'd learned to ride her bike on the gravel driveway. She'd had her first kiss by the old oak tree near the pond. I'd held her when she cried after her high school boyfriend broke her heart, and I'd paid for her college education when her father disappeared into his midlife crisis. And now she was waiting for me to lose my mind so she could cash in on my life's work. I picked up my teacup and took a slow sip. The Earl Grey was perfect, as always. My hands were steady, my mind was clear, and I was very much in control of all my faculties. Well, I said to the empty kitchen, my voice calm and measured. If they want to see me disappear, I suppose I should give them exactly what they're asking for. But not in the way they expected. I had built an empire once before from nothing. I could certainly tear one down from the inside. And if my own daughter wanted to play games with a woman she thought was losing her mind, she was about to learn that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The rain kept falling, but I was no longer listening to it. I was listening to the sound of wheels turning in my head, plans forming, strategies crystallizing. Maggie and Jared thought they were waiting for me to fade away. They had no idea they were about to watch me become more dangerous than I'd ever been in my life. The first rule of warfare is to make your enemy underestimate you. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began planning my own disappearance. Not a death. I wasn't quite ready for that level of drama, but a disappearance mysterious enough to send Maggie and Jared into a panic, comprehensive enough to protect everything I'd built, and strategic enough to begin the slow process of their destruction. By morning, I had a plan. First, I needed to secure my assets. I called my lawyer, Vincent Marlowe, at 7 a.m. sharp. Vincent had been with me since the early days of coal industries, back when we were both young and hungry and stupid enough to think we could change the world through sheer determination. Now, we were both older and wiser, and Vincent had developed a particular expertise in what he called asset protection for complicated families. Marion. His voice was warm but alert despite the early hour. What's got you calling before my first cup of coffee? I need my assets invisible, Vincent. All of them. And I need it done quietly and quickly. There was a pause. Vincent had known me long enough to understand that I didn't make dramatic requests without good reason. How invisible are we talking? And from whom? From my daughter. And her husband. They're planning to have me declared incompetent so they can liquidate everything I've built. Another pause, longer this time. Are you sure? I heard them planning it. Yesterday. They think I'm losing my mind, and they're waiting for me to deteriorate enough that they can take control of everything. And are you? Losing your mind, I mean, I almost smiled. Vincent, in 30 years of knowing me, have I ever sounded more lucid? No, he admitted. No, you haven't. What do you need me to do? Everything. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, trust funds with ironclad beneficiary protections. I want coal industries transferred to entities they can't trace or touch. I want the farmhouse protected. I want every asset I own to become a ghost. That's extensive. And expensive. And it'll take time. I have money, and I'll make time. How long? 2 weeks minimum. Maybe 3 if we want to do it properly. You have 1 week, Vincent. After that, I'm disappearing, and I need to know that everything I've built is safe from them. Disappearing? Marion, what exactly are you planning? I'm planning to give them exactly what they want, a confused, helpless woman who vanishes without a trace. Let them panic. Let them wonder if I'm dead or alive or wandering around some city with no memory of who I am. Let them discover that all their careful plans were built on quicksand. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. You want them to think you're dead? I want them to think whatever causes them the most distress. If that's death, fine. If it's thinking I'm alive but lost and helpless somewhere, even better. The key is uncertainty. People can cope with death. There's finality to it, legal processes to follow, estates to settle. But disappearance? That's psychological torture. And legally? Legally, I'll be missing, not dead. No body, no death certificate, no estate to probate. They'll be in limbo, and everything I own will be safely out of their reach. Marion, this is incredibly sophisticated revenge. It's not revenge, Vincent.
Not yet.
This is just the opening move. Over the next week, I became a woman possessed. Not by confusion or dementia, but by purpose. I liquidated my personal bank accounts, transferring the money to new accounts Vincent set up under shell corporations registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. I signed papers transferring ownership of coal industries to a complex web of holding companies and trusts, all designed to make it legally impossible for Maggie and Jared to gain control, even if I were declared dead. The house was trickier. It had too much sentimental value to simply transfer away, but Vincent found a solution. A revocable trust that would protect it from probate while allowing me to maintain control through a series of intermediaries. If you're declared dead after 7 years, he explained, the trust transfers everything to the Marion Cole Foundation for Alzheimer's Research. There is no Marion Cole Foundation for Alzheimer's Research. There will be by then. I'll make sure of it. But the beautiful thing is, the foundation's board will be appointed by trustees who answer to holding companies that you control through other entities. It's completely circular. You'll effectively be inheriting from yourself. And Maggie gets nothing. Ever. Even if she contests the will, even if she somehow proves you're still alive, the structure is bulletproof. She can't touch any of it. While Vincent worked his legal magic, I focused on the practical aspects of disappearing. I opened a safety deposit box in a town 2 hours away and filled it with cash, false identification documents I acquired through Vincent's more questionable contacts, and detailed dossiers I compiled on Maggie and Jared's finances, secrets, and vulnerabilities. I also began documenting everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment of casual cruelty I'd endured over the past several years. I recorded phone calls, saved text messages, and compiled a comprehensive record of their true feelings about me and their plans for my future. All of this went into the safety deposit box, along with sealed instructions for Vincent on how to use the information when the time was right. On Thursday of that week, Maggie called to invite me to dinner on Saturday. "We miss you, Mom," she said, her voice saccharine with false affection. "You've seemed so distant lately. Jared and I were wondering if maybe you'd like to come over for dinner this weekend. I could make that pot roast you love." The pot roast I love. She had made me pot roast in 5 years, not since she decided that red meat was too heavy for someone my age. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart," I said, letting just a hint of confusion creep into my voice. "What day did you say?" "Saturday, Mom. This Saturday. We talked about it yesterday, remember?" We hadn't talked yesterday, but I let the lie slide. "Of course. Saturday. What time should I be there?" "How about 6? And Mom, maybe don't drive yourself. The roads have been confusing you lately, and we worry about you getting lost." I hadn't gotten lost in 20 years, but again, I played along. "You're probably right. I'll call a taxi." "Perfect. See you Saturday." After I hung up, I smiled. Saturday would be perfect timing. By Saturday evening, all my assets would be secure, all my plans would be in place, and I would be ready to begin my final performance as the confused, deteriorating woman they expected me to be. Saturday would be the last time Maggie and Jared saw Marion Cole, successful businesswoman and loving mother. After that, I would become someone else entirely. Someone they had created with their greed and their cruelty and their casual dismissal of my humanity. Someone who would teach them that underestimating a woman you've betrayed is the last mistake you ever want to make. I spent Friday packing a single overnight bag with clothes that would make me look older and more fragile than I was. Gray cardigans, comfortable shoes, the kind of clothing that would make people think poor dear rather than successful executive. I also packed the most important thing of all, the small digital recorder I would wear to dinner on Saturday, capturing every word of their conversation for the archives I was building. Because the thing about disappearing is that it's only effective if people understand exactly why you vanished. And I was going to make sure that someday, when the time was right, Maggie and Jared understood exactly what they had done to deserve what was coming to them. The last thing I did Friday night was write myself a letter, sealed and addressed to be delivered to Vincent's office exactly 1 month after my disappearance. "Vincent, by now they'll be desperate. Let them panic for another month, then begin phase 2. Use everything in the safety deposit box. Show them what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. I dressed carefully in the clothes that would make me look vulnerable and confused. I practiced my new mannerisms in the mirror. The slight tremor in my hands, the way I would lose my train of thought mid-sentence, the confused blinking that would make them think my mind was slipping away. Then I called the taxi and prepared for my final performance as the woman they thought they knew. By Sunday morning, Marion Cole would be gone forever. And Margaret Collins, the new identity Vincent had helped me create, would begin the most important work of her life. They wanted to feast on my destruction. I decided to give them an appetizer. The taxi dropped me off at Maggie's house at exactly 6 o'clock. It was a beautiful colonial in the expensive part of town, purchased with money I'd lent them for the down payment 3 years ago. Money they'd promised to pay back but never had because family doesn't charge family interest, Mom. I stood on their doorstep for a moment, adjusting the tiny digital recorder hidden in my cardigan pocket, and then knocked softly. Through the frosted glass, I could see movement, hear voices. She's here. Jared's voice carried through the door. Remember what we talked about? Maggie replied quietly. See how confused she seems. If she's getting worse, maybe we should mention the assisted living place we looked at. I knocked again, adding a slight tremor to my hand as I did. Maggie opened the door with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes.
Mom.
You look tired. Are you feeling all right? I blinked at her slowly, as if it took me a moment to focus. Maggie? Oh, sweetheart, you look so grown up. When did you get so tall? The flash of satisfaction in her eyes was unmistakable. I was performing exactly as she expected.
Come in, Mom.
Dinner's almost ready. She took my arm gently, guiding me inside like I was made of glass. Jared's in the living room. You remember Jared, don't you? Jared? I looked around vaguely. Is he the one who sells insurance?
No, Mom.
Jared is my husband. We've been married for 5 years. 5 years. I shook my head slowly. That doesn't seem right. Weren't you just in college? Maggie exchanged a look with Jared, who had appeared in the hallway. He was a thin man with pale eyes and soft hands who'd never worked a day of physical labor in his life. The kind of man who thought intelligence was measured by the ability to manipulate others. Hi, Mrs. Cole, he said, his voice carefully modulated to the tone people use with children and the elderly. How are you feeling today? I'm fine, dear, I replied, then paused and looked confused. I'm sorry. What was your name again?
Jared.
I'm Maggie's husband. Of course you are. I knew that. I smiled vaguely. My memory isn't what it used to be. Over dinner, I gave them the performance of my lifetime. I forgot Jared's name twice more. I asked Maggie when she was planning to have children, even though she'd told me years ago that she and Jared had decided against it. I complimented the pot roast 3 times, as if each time was the first. But I also listened. Oh, how I listened. Mom, Maggie said carefully, cutting my meat for me as if I couldn't manage it myself. Jared and I have been talking about your living situation. My living situation? I looked puzzled. What about it? Well, you're all alone in that big house, and we worry about you. What if you fell? What if you forgot to turn off the stove? What if you got confused and wandered outside in the cold? I suppose that could happen, I said slowly. But I like my house. I've lived there for— how long have I lived there? 23 years, Mom. 23 years, I repeated. That's a long time. I have memories there. Good memories. We know you do, Jared interjected, his voice oily with false sympathy. But we've found this wonderful place, Sunset Manor. It's specifically designed for people with memory issues. You'd have your own apartment, but there would be staff to help you with daily tasks, medication management, that sort of thing. And it's so close to us, Maggie added. We could visit every day. I looked back and forth between them, letting confusion cloud my features. Are you saying I can't live in my own house anymore? We're just saying it might be safer, Maggie replied gently. We love you, Mom, and we want what's best for you. What's best for them, she meant. Getting me out of the house would make it easier to eventually claim everything I owned. What about my company? I asked, though I made my voice sound like I wasn't entirely sure what company I was referring to. Coal Industries? Maggie exchanged another look with Jared. Mom, you haven't been involved in running the company for months. The managers are handling everything. Maybe it's time to think about transitioning ownership. Transitioning ownership, I repeated slowly. To whom? Well, to me eventually. I am your daughter, and I understand the business. I've been learning about it, working with some of the senior staff. It would be a natural transition. Maggie had never shown the slightest interest in coal industries. She'd studied art history in college and had worked as a gallery coordinator before marrying Jared and becoming a professional spouse. Her idea of understanding business was reading the financial section of the newspaper. I suppose that makes sense, I said finally. Though I don't remember discussing it with you. We've talked about it several times, Mom. You don't always remember our conversations anymore. After dinner, they insisted on driving me home, even though I'd planned to take another taxi. I sat in the back seat of their BMW, listening to them talk in low voices about next steps and legal consultations while I stared out the window at the familiar roads of my childhood home. When we reached my house, Jared walked me to the door. Mrs. Cole, he said, his hand on my arm, we want you to think about what we discussed tonight. About Sunset Manor. We've already put down a deposit to hold a spot for you. You did. I looked up at him with wide eyes. When? Last week. We were so worried about you living alone. Promise me you'll think about it. I'll think about it, I said obediently. After they left, I stood in my living room and replayed the evening in my mind. Every word, every look, every casual cruelty disguised as concern. The digital recorder had captured all of it, adding to the growing archive of evidence I was building.
But more than that, I now knew their timeline.
They had already put down a deposit at Sunset Manor. They were planning to move quickly, probably within the next few weeks, which meant I needed to move even more quickly. I spent that night making final preparations. I packed the overnight bag I'd already prepared, hiding it in my car. I transferred the last of my accessible cash to the new accounts Vincent had established. I wrote brief letters to the senior staff at Cole Industries, explaining that I would be taking an extended leave of absence due to health concerns and that all business decisions should continue to be made according to the established protocols. Most importantly, I called Vincent one last time. It's happening tomorrow, I told him. Are we ready? As ready as we can be. The asset transfers are complete, the shell corporations are established, and the new accounts are active. Legally speaking, Marion Cole owns almost nothing that can be easily traced or claimed. And the other thing? Margaret Collins has a complete identity, including social security number, credit history, and bank accounts. She's a retired librarian from Oregon who recently moved to Vermont. Quiet, unremarkable, invisible. Perfect. And the safety deposit box. The key is exactly where you said it would be. When you give me the signal, I'll retrieve everything and begin phase 2. Thank you, Vincent, for everything. Marion, are you sure about this? Once you disappear, there's no taking it back. Your relationship with Maggie will be over forever. I thought about that for a moment. Vincent, my relationship with Maggie ended the moment she started planning my institutionalization so she could steal everything I've built. I'm just making it official. Sunday morning, I woke before dawn and drove my car to a Walmart parking lot 2 towns away. I left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition, knowing it would either be stolen or found by police within hours. Either way, it would create the perfect mystery: a missing woman, an abandoned car, no witnesses, no explanation. From there, I walked 3 blocks to where Vincent had left Margaret Collins's car, a nondescript sedan that no one would notice or remember. I drove it to a small cabin I'd rented under my new identity, 40 miles north in New Hampshire, and settled in to wait. By evening, Maggie would be calling my house, getting no answer. By Monday, she'd be panicking. By Tuesday, she'd be calling the police. And by Wednesday, when the search began in earnest, I would begin watching from the shadows as their carefully laid plans crumbled into chaos. The woman they'd tried to manipulate and control was gone forever. In her place was someone far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to plan their destruction. The most terrifying disappearances are the ones that leave no trace, but endless questions. My phone started ringing at 6:47 p.m. on Sunday. I was sitting in the cabin in New Hampshire, watching the local news on an old television while I ate a simple dinner of soup and crackers. The phone, Marion Cole's phone, registered to the house in Vermont, sat on the kitchen table, vibrating and lighting up with increasing urgency. Maggie calling. I let it ring. Then I let it ring again. And again. By 9 p.m., there had been 14 missed calls from Maggie and 6 from Jared. The voicemails were illuminating. First call. Mom, it's Maggie. Just checking to make sure you got home safely last night. Call me back. Fifth call. Mom, where are you? I've been calling for hours. Please pick up the phone. 10th call. Mom, this isn't funny. If you don't answer your phone, I'm coming over there. 14th call. Mom, I'm scared. Please call me back. I love you. The progression from casual concern to genuine panic was exactly what I'd expected. What I hadn't expected was how little satisfaction it gave me. This was my daughter, after all, the little girl I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for. Hearing the fear in her voice should have made me feel something other than clinical detachment. But then I remembered her laughter as she discussed my inevitable mental decline, and the momentary softness vanished. Monday morning brought a new series of calls, these more frantic. I could picture Maggie standing in my kitchen, looking around for signs of where I might have gone, growing more desperate by the hour. At 11:30 a.m., she called Vincent. Mr. Marlowe? It's Maggie Langley, Marion Cole's daughter. I can't find my mother. She's not answering her phone. She's not at the house. Her car is gone. I'm really worried about her mental state. I was listening to this conversation through the speakerphone in Vincent's office. He'd called me immediately when Maggie contacted him, and we'd set up a three-way call, so I could hear everything. When did you last see your mother? Vincent asked, his voice professionally concerned. Saturday night. We had dinner together, and she seemed confused. More confused than usual. We've been worried about her memory, and I think she might have driven somewhere and gotten lost. Have you called the police? Not yet. I was hoping. Maybe she just went to visit a friend or something. But, Mr. Marlowe, if she's missing, what happens to her business? To her assets? She's been having serious cognitive issues, and I'm worried she might do something irresponsible. There it was. Less than 24 hours after my disappearance, and Maggie was already thinking about the money. Mrs. Langley, Vincent said carefully, if your mother is truly missing, the first priority is finding her safely. Legal and financial matters are secondary to her well-being. Of course, Maggie said quickly. That's what I meant. It's just she controls everything, and if something's happened to her, I need to know what my options are. Your options are to find your mother. Everything else can wait. After Maggie hung up, Vincent and I continued our conversation. She's already thinking about inheritance law, he observed. Of course she is. How long before she calls the police? I'd guess by this afternoon. She'll want to establish an official missing person report as quickly as possible. It'll be useful for any future legal proceedings. I was right. At 2:15 p.m., Maggie called the Vermont State Police to report me missing. I knew this because Vincent had contacts who kept him informed about such things, and because the story made the local news that evening. Local businesswoman Marion Cole, 57, was reported missing today by her daughter after failing to return phone calls and not being found at her home. Cole is the founder and CEO of Cole Industries, a successful software development company. Police say there are concerns about her mental health and ask anyone with information to contact them immediately. The news report included a photo of me, a professional headshot from the Cole Industries website where I looked confident and successful. They also interviewed Maggie, who had clearly prepared for the moment. My mother has been struggling with memory issues, she told the reporter, tears streaming down her face. She's been confused lately, forgetting things, getting lost. I'm terrified that she drove somewhere and can't remember how to get home. It was a masterful performance. Maggie looked like a devoted daughter worried sick about her declining mother. The tears appeared genuine, the concern seemed real, and she struck exactly the right balance between love and worry. What the cameras didn't capture was the calculation behind her eyes, the way she emphasized my supposed mental decline, the subtle suggestions that I was no longer competent to make my own decisions. Tuesday brought search parties. Volunteers combed the woods around my house, while police divers searched the pond on my property. Helicopters flew overhead, and bloodhounds tracked my scent from the house to the driveway, where it disappeared. I watched it all from the cabin, using binoculars to observe the activity from a distant hillside. It was surreal, watching people search desperately for someone who was sitting 2 miles away, completely safe and utterly invisible. By Wednesday, the story had expanded beyond local news. Businesswoman vanishes amid concerns about mental health appeared in regional newspapers. The coverage was sympathetic to Maggie, portraying her as a loving daughter coping with her mother's deteriorating condition. The reporters spoke to my neighbors, who described me as quiet and private but always seemed sharp as a tack. They interviewed employees at coal industries, who insisted I'd been functioning normally in business meetings just weeks earlier. But they also spoke to Dr. Hendricks, who carefully explained that dementia could be unpredictable, that patients could seem normal one day and completely confused the next. It's possible that Mrs. Cole had what we call a catastrophic episode, he told one reporter. Sudden, severe confusion that could cause someone to wander off without any memory of where they intended to go. Dr. Hendricks, who had been prescribing me unnecessary medication for a condition I didn't have, based on reports from a daughter who was lying about my symptoms. The same Dr. Hendricks, who had been billing my insurance for treatments I didn't need. I made a mental note to add him to my growing list of people who would eventually face consequences for their actions. Thursday morning brought the development I'd been waiting for. My car was found in the Walmart parking lot, keys still in the ignition. Police say the discovery of Cole's vehicle raises more questions than it answers, the news reported. Security footage shows Cole parking the car Sunday morning, but she's not seen leaving the area. Investigators are expanding their search to neighboring states. Friday brought the lawyers. I knew this because Vincent called me immediately after receiving a visit from Maggie and Jared, accompanied by an attorney I didn't recognize. They want to file for emergency conservatorship, Vincent told me. They're claiming that your disappearance proves you're mentally incompetent and that immediate action is needed to protect your assets. On what grounds? They've got medical records from Dr. Hendricks documenting cognitive decline, witness statements about your recent behavior, and the fact that you vanished without explanation. They're arguing that a mentally competent person wouldn't just disappear, leaving their car in a random parking lot. And what did you tell them? That I'd need to see a court order before I could discuss your affairs with anyone, including family members. But Marion, they're moving fast. They want to be appointed as conservators so they can make decisions about coal industries before any competitors figure out what's happening. This was perfect. Let them file their legal papers, let them make their arguments in court. When they discovered that all my assets had vanished into untraceable corporate structures, when they realized that there was nothing left for them to conserve, their desperation would reach new heights. Let them file, I told Vincent. In fact, encourage them. The more legal fees they rack up chasing assets that don't exist, the better. And what about you? How long are you planning to stay disappeared? Long enough for them to show their true colors completely. Long enough for everyone to see exactly what kind of people they really are. Marion, there's something else. The police want to search your house more thoroughly. They're looking for signs of foul play now, not just evidence of where you might have gone. Let them search. They won't find anything useful. What they wouldn't find was the safe hidden behind a false wall in my basement, now empty of everything valuable. They wouldn't find the detailed financial records I'd removed, or the backup drives containing years of business data, or the personal documents that might give them insight into my real plans. What they would find was exactly what I'd left for them: evidence of a confused woman whose grip on reality had been slipping away gradually over months. I'd planted fake medical appointment cards for specialists I'd never seen. I'd left notes to myself about things I needed to remember, written in increasingly shaky handwriting. I'd even left a journal with entries documenting my growing confusion and fear about my failing memory. The journal was a masterpiece of misdirection, chronicling the gradual decline of a woman who is terrified of losing her mind. The final entry, dated 3 days before my disappearance, read, "I can't remember if I took my medication this morning or yesterday morning. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman looking back at me. Maggie is worried about me living alone, and maybe she's right. Maybe I'm not safe by myself anymore. I'm scared of what's happening to me. I'm scared of forgetting everything that matters." It was exactly the kind of evidence that would support their claims of mental incompetence, while simultaneously painting me as a tragic figure rather than a calculating strategist. Saturday marked 1 week since my disappearance. The local news ran a special report on the search efforts, interviewing Maggie again as she stood in front of my house, looking devastated. Saturday marked 1 week since my disappearance. The local news ran a special report on the search efforts, interviewing Maggie again as she stood in front of my house, looking devastated. "It's been the longest week of my life," she told the camera. "Every minute feels like an hour. I just want my mom to come home safely. She built this beautiful life, this successful business, and now she can't even remember where she lives. It's heartbreaking." The reporter asked about the business, and Maggie's response was pitch perfect. "Coal Industries employs 47 people. These are families who depend on my mother's company for their livelihoods. Right now, everything is in limbo because Mom is the sole owner and decision maker. We're trying to keep things running normally, but without her, it's difficult." What Maggie didn't know was that none of it was true anymore. She could file all the conservatorship papers she wanted, but she'd be seeking control over a company that was no longer legally mine to give her. That evening, I decided it was time for the next phase of my plan. I drove Margaret Collins's unremarkable sedan back toward Vermont, parking in a different town 20 miles from my house. Then I walked to a payphone, yes, they still existed if you knew where to look, and made a call. "Vermont State Police, how can I help you?" I disguised my voice, making it higher and more tentative. I think I might have seen that missing woman, Marion Cole. Ma'am, can you give me your location? I don't want to get involved, but I saw a woman who looked like her at a bus station in Albany yesterday. She seemed confused, like she didn't know where she was. She kept asking people if they knew how to get to Burlington, but when they asked her why she wanted to go there, she couldn't remember. Can you describe what you saw exactly? She was wearing gray clothes, and her hair was kind of messy. She had this lost look, like she was scared. A man tried to help her, but she got frightened and walked away. I didn't think much of it until I saw her picture on the news tonight. Did you see which direction she went? Toward the parking lot, I think. But that was yesterday around noon. She could be anywhere by now. I hung up before they could ask more questions. Within hours, the search had expanded to Albany and surrounding areas. Police released a statement asking for the public's help in locating a confused and potentially disoriented woman who may not remember her own identity.
Perfect.
Now I wasn't just missing. I was a tragic figure wandering around in a state of mental confusion, unable to care for myself or find my way home. Sunday morning brought exactly what I'd hoped for. Maggie appeared on a regional television program, making a desperate plea for my return. "If anyone sees my mother, please don't be afraid to approach her," she said, looking directly into the camera. "She might seem confused or frightened, but she's not dangerous. She's just lost and scared. We love her so much, and we want to bring her home." The host asked about my mental condition, and Maggie's response was clinically perfect. Mom has been struggling with early-stage dementia for about a year now. Some days she's completely herself, sharp and funny and brilliant. Other days, she can't remember what she had for breakfast. The doctors say it's progressive, that it will only get worse. That's why we're so terrified. She could be anywhere, with no memory of how she got there or how to get back. Early-stage dementia. Progressive deterioration. Unable to care for herself. Every word was being recorded, not just by the television station, but by the digital recorder I'd hidden in the studio before the interview. Vincent's contacts were very thorough when it came to gathering evidence. After the interview, Maggie and Jared went to lunch at an upscale restaurant where they had a conversation I was very interested in hearing. Thanks to the listening device I'd had installed in their car the previous week, one of the many services Vincent's shadier contacts provided, I was able to listen to every word. "How do you think that went?" Jared asked as they drove home. "Good, I think. Sympathetic, but not overdramatic. The key is to keep emphasizing how confused she's become lately." And the conservatorship hearing? Tuesday morning. The lawyer thinks it's a slam dunk, especially with the medical records and the disappearance. Once we're appointed as conservators, we can start making decisions about the business. What if she turns up before then? Maggie was quiet for a moment. Honestly, at this point, I'm not sure I want her to turn up. If she's found wandering around somewhere, completely confused and unable to take care of herself, it just proves that we were right about her condition. It might actually help our case. And if she's dead, then we inherit everything outright, and we don't have to go through the conservatorship process at all. There it was, recorded for posterity. My own daughter casually discussing whether my death might be more convenient than my survival. I sat in the cabin that evening, listening to the recording again and feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. Whatever maternal love I'd still harbored for Maggie after overhearing her original conversation was now completely gone. She wasn't just greedy or impatient. She was genuinely hoping I was dead. Well, she was about to get her wish. Not literally, of course, but the Marion Cole she thought she knew was about to die in every way that mattered. And from her ashes would rise someone far more dangerous than a confused old woman with failing memory. Someone who remembered everything and forgave nothing. Sometimes you have to come back from the dead to deliver justice to the living. I returned on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after my disappearance, just as Maggie and Jared were preparing to leave for their conservatorship hearing. I'd spent hours perfecting my appearance for this moment. My hair was tangled and dirty, my clothes were wrinkled and stained, and I'd used makeup to create dark circles under my eyes and a gaunt look around my cheeks. I looked like a woman who'd been wandering in the wilderness, surviving on nothing but confusion and fear. I parked Margaret Collins's car 3 miles from the house and walked the rest of the way through the woods, emerging from the tree line just as a police cruiser was pulling out of my driveway. Officer Patricia Mills was the first to see me. She'd been coordinating the search efforts, and the relief on her face when she spotted me stumbling across my front yard was genuine. "Marion? Marion Cole." I looked at her blankly, then allowed recognition to slowly dawn in my eyes. I know you, don't I? I'm Officer Mills, Marion. We've been looking for you everywhere. Where have you been?" I looked around in confusion, as if seeing my own house for the first time in years. Is this my home?" "Yes, this is your home. Your daughter has been worried sick about you." "My daughter?" I frowned, the picture of a woman struggling to access memories that seemed just out of reach. "I have a daughter?" Within minutes, my yard was full of people. Police officers, paramedics, reporters who'd gotten word that the missing woman had been found. And Maggie, racing up the driveway in her BMW with tears streaming down her face. "Mom. Oh, Mom. Thank God you're safe." She ran to me and threw her arms around me, sobbing into my shoulder. It would have been touching if I had known she'd been hoping I was dead just hours earlier. "I'm sorry," I whispered into her ear, making sure my voice carried just the right amount of confusion and fear. I can't remember where I've been." The paramedics insisted on taking me to the hospital, where I spent 3 hours being examined by doctors who found exactly what I wanted them to find: a woman in poor physical condition who appeared to be suffering from severe memory loss and disorientation. "Mrs. Cole," Dr. Patterson asked gently, "can you tell me what year it is?" I frowned, struggling visibly. "It's 19. No, that's not right. 2000 something. Do you remember where you've been for the past 2 weeks? 2 weeks. I looked genuinely startled. I've been gone for 2 weeks. Your family has been very worried about you. I looked around the hospital room as if seeing it for the first time. I remember walking. A lot of walking. And being cold. But I can't remember why I was walking or where I was trying to go. Dr. Patterson made notes on his chart. "Mrs. Cole, I'm going to recommend that you be evaluated by a neurologist. Your symptoms suggest that your cognitive decline may be accelerating."
Perfect.
More medical documentation of my supposed mental deterioration. That afternoon, Maggie took me home, fussing over me like a devoted daughter. She made me tea, ran me a bath, and insisted I rest while she took care of everything. What she was really doing was making phone calls. "Dr. Hendricks? It's Maggie Langley. Mom's been found. No, she's not okay. She's much worse." She didn't recognize me at first, and she can't remember anything about the past 2 weeks. "Yes, I think we need to discuss more intensive care options." "Mr. Peterson? It's Maggie. We need to reschedule the conservatorship hearing." "No, we still want to proceed. If anything, her condition has deteriorated so much that it's even more urgent now." "Jared? She's home, but she's like a completely different person. I don't think she can live independently anymore. We need to move fast on the Sunset Manor placement." Each conversation was captured by the recording devices I'd had installed throughout the house during my disappearance. Vincent's people had been very thorough. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table sipping the tea Maggie had made for me, I began the most important performance of my life. "Maggie, sweetheart," I said, my voice wavering with uncertainty. "I'm scared. I can't remember things. Important things. What if I forget you?" "Oh, Mom." She sat down next to me and took my hands in hers. "You're never going to forget me. I won't let you." "But what about my company? I built something, didn't I? Something important." "You built Coal Industries, Mom. But you don't need to worry about that anymore. I'm going to take care of everything for you." "You are?" Relief flooded my features. "You'll make sure it's safe?" "I promise. You just focus on getting better, and let me handle all the business stuff." "I don't understand business anymore," I confessed, allowing tears to well up in my eyes. "Sometimes I look at papers, and the words don't make sense." "That's okay, Mom. That's why you have me." Over the next few days, I gave them exactly what they wanted: a compliant, confused woman who was grateful for their care and eager to sign whatever documents they put in front of me. When they brought me papers transferring power of attorney, I signed without reading them. When they mentioned that I might be more comfortable at Sunset Manor, I nodded agreeably. When they suggested that Maggie should take over the day-to-day operations of Coal Industries, I told her how proud I was of her business acumen. What they didn't realize was that every document they asked me to sign was worthless. You can't transfer ownership of assets you don't actually own, and thanks to Vincent's work during my disappearance, I didn't legally own anything they thought they were gaining control of. But I let them think they were winning. I let them believe that their plan was working perfectly. Meanwhile, I began my own work. Every morning, I cooked breakfast for all three of us. Jared had moved into my house to help take care of me. Big country breakfasts with eggs and bacon and pancakes, the kind of hearty meals that would stick to their ribs and keep them satisfied. What they didn't know was that I was adding a special ingredient to their portions, a mild, slow-acting toxin that I'd obtained through the same underground contacts who'd provided my false identity documents. Not enough to kill them. I wasn't a murderer. But enough to make them feel progressively worse over time. Headaches,
Fatigue. Nausea.
loss of appetite. The kind of symptoms that could be attributed to stress or poor diet or any number of harmless causes, but that would slowly sap their energy and cloud their judgment. I love taking care of my family, I told them as I served breakfast each morning, my voice warm with maternal affection. It makes me feel useful, even when I can't remember other things. Within a week, both Maggie and Jared were complaining of feeling run down. It's probably just stress, Maggie told Jared as they sat at my kitchen table, picking at their eggs. Between the search, the legal proceedings, and now managing Mom's care, we're both exhausted. Maybe we should see a doctor, Jared suggested, rubbing his temples. These headaches are getting worse. After we get Mom settled at Sunset Manor, Maggie replied. Once that's taken care of, we can focus on ourselves. I nodded sympathetically from the stove, where I was preparing their next dose of justice disguised as loving care. You two work so hard, I said softly. I don't know what I'd do without you. They had no idea that they were eating their own destruction, one carefully prepared meal at a time. But the poisoned food was just the beginning. While they were feeling increasingly unwell, I was systematically replacing every valuable item in the house with expertly crafted fakes. Maggie's jewelry collection, piece by piece, went into a safe deposit box I'd opened under Margaret Collins's name. In their place went remarkably convincing replicas that would fool casual inspection but would be revealed as worthless if anyone ever tried to sell them. Jared's collection of vintage watches followed the same path. The expensive electronics, the artwork, the antique furniture, all replaced with copies while the originals disappeared into secure storage. My years of building coal industries had taught me to plan for every contingency, and I'd spent months before my disappearance identifying and acquiring the resources I'd need for this phase of my revenge. The beauty of it was that they were so focused on the big prize, control of the company, that they didn't notice the smaller thefts happening right under their noses. Every morning, I cooked their poisoned breakfast. Every afternoon, while they were out meeting with lawyers or handling business, I swapped another valuable item for a fake. Every evening, I played the role of the grateful, confused mother who was so lucky to have such devoted family members taking care of her. And every night, I recorded their private conversations as they discussed their plans for my future. The transfer should be complete by the end of the month, Maggie told Jared one evening as they sat in what used to be my living room. Once I have full control of coal industries, we can start liquidating assets. What about your mother? What about her? She'll be safe at Sunset Manor, getting the care she needs. And we'll visit regularly, of course. Of course, Jared agreed. How often do you think? Once a week? Once a month? Maggie shrugged. As often as necessary to maintain appearances. The important thing is that she'll be taken care of, and we'll finally be free to live our lives. Free to live their lives on the proceeds of everything I'd built. Except they weren't going to get the chance. Because while they were planning my institutionalization and their future wealth, I was planning something far more permanent for them. The poison breakfasts were just the appetizer. The real feast was yet to come. The most satisfying revenge is watching your enemies destroy themselves with their own greed. 3 weeks after my return, Maggie and Jared looked like ghosts of their former selves. The slow-acting toxin was doing its work perfectly. They were pale, thin, and constantly exhausted, but the symptoms were subtle enough that doctors kept attributing their illness to stress and poor diet. Maybe we should take a vacation after we get Mom settled, Jared suggested weakly as he pushed away another untouched breakfast. Somewhere warm. I feel like I haven't seen the sun in months. Soon, Maggie promised, though she looked barely strong enough to lift her coffee cup. Once the business transition is complete and Mom is safe at Sunset Manor, we can go anywhere we want. I nodded sympathetically from my place at the stove. You two have been working so hard. You deserve a nice vacation. What they deserved and what they were going to get were two very different things. That morning, Vincent called with news I'd been expecting. The conservatorship hearing is scheduled for Friday, he told me. They're pushing hard for emergency guardianship, claiming you're a danger to yourself and unable to manage your affairs. Let them push, I replied. Friday will be perfect timing. For what? For them to discover that there's nothing left to conserve. I'd been very patient, very careful, very thorough. Every morning for 3 weeks, I'd fed them poison, disguised as love. Every afternoon, I'd stolen their possessions and replaced them with worthless fakes. Every evening, I'd played the confused old woman who was grateful for their care. But Friday would be the day they learned the true scope of what they'd lost. Thursday evening, I made my final preparations. I packed Margaret Collins's overnight bag with clothes and cash. I transferred the last of the real valuables from the house to secure storage. And I prepared the final revelation that would destroy them completely. Then I cooked them one last breakfast. This is special, I told them as I set their plates down Friday morning. A farewell meal before you take me to Sunset Manor this afternoon. They picked at their food without enthusiasm. The poison had robbed them of their appetites weeks ago, but they still ate enough to ensure the final dose would be absorbed into their systems. Mom, Maggie said, her voice weak but determined, there's something we need to tell you about your business. My business. I looked at her with the wide-eyed confusion they'd come to expect. Coal industries. We've been working with the lawyers, and it turns out there were some irregularities in the company structure. Problems that need to be fixed. What kind of problems? I asked innocently. Technical problems, Jared interjected. Legal issues that are too complicated to explain. The important thing is that we're handling everything for you. But the good news, Maggie continued, is that once we resolve these issues, the company will be more valuable than ever. You'll be taken care of for the rest of your life. I smiled gratefully. You're such good children. I'm so lucky to have you. They had no idea that while they'd been focusing on gaining control of coal industries, the company itself had been quietly liquidated, its assets distributed among shell corporations, its employees transferred to new entities, its physical offices closed and abandoned. There was no coal industries anymore. There hadn't been for weeks. But I let them maintain their illusion for a few more hours. At 10 a.m., we drove to the courthouse for the conservatorship hearing. I sat in the back seat of their BMW, playing with the hem of my dress like a nervous child, while they discussed their strategy in low voices. Remember, Maggie told Jared, we need to emphasize how much her condition has deteriorated since she disappeared. The judge needs to see that she's not capable of making decisions for herself anymore. What if she has one of her lucid moments during the hearing? She won't. Look at her. She can barely remember what day it is. I was remembering everything, actually. Every word, every casual cruelty, every assumption that I was too far gone to understand what they were doing to me. The hearing was a masterpiece of legal theater. Maggie testified tearfully about my declining mental state, my disappearance, my inability to care for myself. Dr. Hendricks presented medical evidence of my cognitive deterioration. Their lawyer painted a picture of a tragic woman who needed protection from her own confused decisions. I sat quietly throughout it all, occasionally looking confused when someone mentioned my name, sometimes asking Maggie in a loud whisper who the people in the black robes were. Judge Morrison was clearly sympathetic to their case. An elderly woman with dementia, unable to care for herself, with loving family members willing to take on the burden of guardianship. It seemed like a straightforward decision. Mrs. Cole, the judge said gently, do you understand why we're here today? I looked around the courtroom with wide, frightened eyes. Are we in trouble? Did I do something wrong?
No, dir.
Your daughter is just trying to make sure you're taken care of properly. Maggie's a good girl, I said, reaching over to pat her hand. She always takes care of me. The judge granted the conservatorship immediately. As we left the courthouse, Maggie was practically glowing with triumph. It's done, she told Jared quietly. We have full legal authority over everything she owns. Everything I owned, which as of that morning was exactly nothing. We drove directly to Vincent's office, where Maggie intended to begin the process of accessing my accounts and transferring control of Cole Industries. Vincent greeted us with professional courtesy, but I caught the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth. Mrs. Langley, Mr. Langley, he said formally, I understand you've been granted conservatorship over Mrs. Cole's affairs. That's right, Maggie said, producing the court documents. We need to discuss the immediate transfer of business assets and access to her accounts. Of course. Please have a seat. They settled into the leather chairs in front of Vincent's desk, while I was guided to a smaller chair off to the side, like a child who is present but not really part of the adult conversation. Now then, Vincent said, opening a thick file folder, let's review Mrs. Cole's current assets. He began reading from a long list of accounts, properties, and business holdings. With each item, Maggie's eyes grew brighter, and Jared leaned forward with increasing interest. Then Vincent reached the end of the list and looked up at them with a puzzled expression. I'm afraid there's a problem, he said carefully. What kind of problem? Maggie asked. Well, according to these documents, Mrs. Cole doesn't actually own any of these assets anymore. The silence in the room was deafening. What do you mean she doesn't own them? Jared demanded. I mean they've been transferred.
Sold.
Liquidated. The accounts have been closed, the properties have been sold to holding companies, and Cole Industries appears to have been dissolved entirely. Maggie's face went white. That's impossible. She couldn't have done any of that. She can barely remember her own name. Nevertheless, Vincent said, consulting his papers again, all of these transactions were completed legally and properly over the past several weeks. Everything was signed, notarized, and filed with the appropriate authorities. But she wasn't competent to make those decisions. Maggie stood up so quickly she nearly fell over. You know she has dementia. How could you let her sign away everything she owned? Mrs. Langley, I'm not sure what you're referring to. I haven't seen your mother since before her disappearance, and at that time she was completely lucid and capable of making her own financial decisions. This is fraud, Jared said, his voice shaking with rage. Someone took advantage of a confused old woman. We'll sue everyone involved. Sue whom? Vincent asked calmly. The transactions were all handled by different law firms, different banks, different corporate entities. And they were all perfectly legal. Your mother had every right to dispose of her assets as she saw fit. From my chair in the corner, I watched my daughter's dreams crumble in real time. All their careful planning, all their patient waiting, all their legal maneuvering, and there was nothing left for them to control. There has to be something, Maggie said desperately. The house, at least. She still owns the house. Vincent consulted another document. Actually, the house was transferred to a private trust 3 weeks ago. The trust provides Mrs. Cole with lifetime residency, but ownership has been transferred to, let me see, the Margaret Collins Foundation for Elderly Care. The Margaret Collins Foundation. My alter ego, taking care of my former self. Who is Margaret Collins? Jared demanded. I have no idea, Vincent replied truthfully. The trust was established by a law firm in Boston. All perfectly legal and properly documented. Maggie sank back into her chair, her face gray with shock and the cumulative effects of weeks of slow poisoning. "So, what you're telling us," she said slowly, "is that we have conservatorship over a woman who owns nothing?" "I'm afraid that appears to be the case, yes. But that's impossible. She had millions. The company alone was worth." "Was worth," Vincent interrupted gently. "Past tense. As of today, Mrs. Cole appears to be essentially indigent. Of course, the trust that owns her house provides for her care, so she won't be homeless. But in terms of liquid assets or business holdings, there's nothing there." The ride home was conducted in complete silence. Maggie and Jared were too stunned to speak, and I continued playing the role of the confused woman who didn't understand what all the fuss was about. "Are we going home now?" I asked as we pulled into the driveway. "I'm tired." Neither of them answered. That evening, as they sat in the living room trying to process what had happened, I puttered around the kitchen preparing dinner. I could hear their conversation clearly, and every word was being recorded by the devices Vincent's people had installed. "It doesn't make sense," Maggie kept repeating. "How could she have sold everything without us knowing?" "Maybe she wasn't as confused as we thought," Jared suggested. "No, that's impossible. You've seen her. She can barely remember what day it is." "Then someone else did it. Someone took advantage of her condition and convinced her to sign everything away." "But who?
And why?"
And how did they manage to hide it from us?" I smiled to myself as I stirred the pot of soup I was making. They would never figure it out because they couldn't conceive of a world where the helpless old woman they'd been manipulating was actually the one manipulating them. The soup, incidentally, contained no poison. I was done with that phase of my revenge. From now on, their destruction would come from their own actions, their own choices, their own greed turned back on itself. "What are we supposed to do now?" Maggie asked, her voice breaking. "We quit our jobs.
We put deposits down on things.
We made plans based on inheriting everything. We still have the conservatorship," Jared pointed out. "Maybe there are assets we don't know about. Hidden accounts or something. With what money are we supposed to investigate? We spent everything we had on legal fees." This was true. In their eagerness to gain control of my supposed fortune, they'd mortgaged their own future. Credit cards maxed out, savings depleted, even their own house refinanced to pay for lawyers and court costs. They'd bet everything on winning the lottery of my death or incapacitation. And they'd lost. But the best part was still to come. Because tomorrow morning, they were going to discover something that would make their current despair seem like mild disappointment. Tomorrow, they were going to learn that not only had they lost everything they thought they were gaining, but they were about to lose everything they thought they still had. I hummed softly as I ladled the soup into bowls, thinking about the surprise I'd prepared for them. Some lessons I'd learned require more than one chapter to teach properly. The cruelest truths are the ones that arrive when you're already broken. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually filled me with energy and optimism. But as I watched Maggie and Jared stumble through their morning routine, pale and exhausted from weeks of slow poisoning, I felt only cold satisfaction. They'd spent the night on my living room sofa, too devastated to go upstairs to the guest room. I found them there at dawn, huddled together like refugees from their own greed, still wearing yesterday's clothes and staring at nothing. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, shuffling into the room with my confused old woman walk perfected. "Did you sleep well?" They looked at me with hollow eyes. The events of yesterday had aged them both 5 years in a single afternoon. "Mom," Maggie said hoarsely, "do you remember anything about selling your company?" I frowned, tilting my head like a confused bird. "I had a company? What kind of company?" "Coal Industries. You built it from nothing. It was your life's work." "That sounds important," I said vaguely.
"I'm sorry, sweetheart."
I don't remember much anymore. Jared stood up abruptly, and walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists. This is insane. People don't just forget selling millions of dollars worth of assets. People with dementia do, Maggie said quietly. The doctors warned us this could happen, that she might make decisions and then have no memory of making them. She was rationalizing, trying to make sense of a situation that defied logic. It was almost sad, watching her struggle to maintain her version of reality in the face of evidence that suggested something else entirely. But I wasn't feeling particularly charitable toward my daughter this morning. "I'll make breakfast," I announced. "You both look terrible. Some good food will help." As I puttered around the kitchen, they continued their whispered conference in the living room. I could hear every word. Of course, their voices carried easily through the thin walls of the old farmhouse. "We need to find out who did this," Jared was saying. "There has to be a paper trail, something that shows who convinced her to sign those documents." "And then what? Even if we find out who it was, the transactions are legal." Vincent made that clear. "Maybe we can prove she wasn't competent when she signed them. Get them reversed." "With what money? We're broke, Jared. We spent everything on the conservatorship proceedings." I smiled as I cracked eggs into the skillet. They were finally beginning to understand the scope of their situation. But they still hadn't discovered the best part. After breakfast, which they barely touched, thanks to the lingering effects of their medication, I suggested they might want to go home and rest. "Home?" Maggie looked confused. "Mom, we've been staying here to take care of you." "That's very sweet, dear, but you both look exhausted. Why don't you go to your own house for the day? I'll be fine here." "Are you sure? You shouldn't be alone, especially after everything that's happened." "I'll be fine," I insisted. "Besides, don't you have things to take care of? Bills to pay, that sort of thing." They exchanged a look. They did indeed have things to take care of, mounting bills they could no longer afford, creditors who were growing impatient, a financial crisis that was about to get much worse. An hour later, they were gone. I waited until their car disappeared down the driveway, then walked to the phone and made a call to Vincent. "It's time," I said simply. "Are you sure? Once we start phase 2, there's no going back." "I'm sure. They chose their path when they decided I was worth more to them dead than alive. Now they get to live with the consequences." "All right. I'll make the calls." I spent the rest of the morning in my garden, pulling weeds and enjoying the sunshine. It was peaceful work, meditative in a way that helped me prepare for what was coming next. Around noon, Maggie called. "Mom." Her voice was shaky, distressed. "We need to come back over there. Something's happened." "What kind of something, dear?" "I can't explain over the phone. We'll be there in 20 minutes. They arrived looking even worse than they had that morning, if such a thing were possible. Maggie's face was streaked with tears, and Jared appeared to be on the verge of a complete breakdown. "Mom, we need to ask you something, and I need you to try really hard to remember," Maggie said, taking my hand in hers. "In the past few weeks, did anyone come to the house? Any strangers asking you to sign papers?" I frowned thoughtfully. "Strangers? I don't think so." "Why?" "Because someone called our bank this morning. They said there were irregularities in our account. When we went to check, Mom, all our money is gone." "Gone?" I looked appropriately shocked. "How can money just be gone?" "Someone transferred it out of our accounts. Large amounts, over the past 3 weeks. The bank says the transfers were authorized with proper identification and signatures." "But you didn't authorize them?" "Of course we didn't authorize them," Jared exploded. "Someone stole everything we had." I patted his arm sympathetically. "That's terrible, dear. Have you called the police?" "The police say it's a civil matter since the transfers appear to have been done legally." "But Mom, here's the strange part. Some of the money was transferred to accounts in your name." This was the moment I'd been building toward for weeks. The revelation that would shatter their understanding of everything that had happened. Accounts in my name? I looked genuinely puzzled. But I thought you said I don't have any money anymore. You don't. These were new accounts, opened recently. But the money that was transferred there has already been moved somewhere else. It's like someone used your identity to steal from us and then made the money disappear again. They were so close to the truth, yet so far from being able to comprehend it. That's very confusing, I said slowly. Who would do such a thing? We don't know. But Mom, we think whoever stole your money also stole ours. Maybe they used information they got from your accounts to access ours. It was a reasonable theory if you accepted their premise that I was an innocent victim of someone else's scheme. They couldn't conceive of the possibility that their confused, helpless mother was the architect of their destruction. What are you going to do? I asked. We don't know, Maggie admitted, breaking down completely. We don't have money for lawyers. We can't even afford to pay our mortgage this month. Everything we had is gone. Can't you borrow money? From whom? Our credit cards are maxed out from the legal fees. We refinanced the house to pay for the conservatorship proceedings. We have no equity left, no savings, no investments. We literally have nothing. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while internally marveling at the completeness of their financial destruction. Vincent's people had been very thorough. Not only had they emptied Maggie and Jared's accounts, but they'd done it in a way that made it appear connected to the theft of my assets. Maybe you could stay here while you figure things out, I suggested. I have plenty of room. We might have to, Jared said miserably. We can't afford rent anywhere else. That afternoon, while they made desperate phone calls to banks and lawyers they couldn't afford, I prepared for the next phase of their education. I called Vincent again from the extension in my bedroom, speaking quietly so they wouldn't overhear. How are they taking it? He asked. About as well as you'd expect. They're financially ruined, but they still think they're victims of the same person who robbed me. And the other items? Ready for discovery. I estimate they'll start noticing by tomorrow evening. Marian, I have to ask, don't you feel any sympathy for them? They're your family. I thought about that question for a moment, looking out my bedroom window at the apple trees Robert had planted when we first bought this property. Vincent, they spent months planning my institutionalization so they could steal everything I'd built. They discussed whether my death would be more convenient than my survival. They fed me unnecessary medication to make me seem more confused than I was. They lied to doctors, lawyers, and judges about my mental state. They were willing to lock me away in a care facility and forget about me as long as they got their inheritance. I know, but there is no but, Vincent. They made their choice when they decided I was worth more to them as an incapacitated victim than as a living mother. Now they get to experience what it feels like to be the victim of someone else's scheme. And when will you reveal the truth to them? When they've learned the lesson completely. When they understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything to someone they trusted. That evening, I cooked dinner for my traumatized houseguests. They picked their food. I was no longer poisoning them, but weeks of toxic doses had left them with ruined appetites and damaged digestion. Mom, Maggie said during our quiet meal, I want you to know that even though we've lost everything, we're still going to take care of you. We'll figure out a way to make this work. You're such good children, I replied warmly. I don't know what I'd do without you. If only she knew that she was about to find out exactly what she'd do without me. Because the financial devastation was just the beginning. Tomorrow, they would start discovering that everything they thought they still owned, their jewelry, their watches, their electronics, even their furniture, had been systematically replaced with worthless fakes over the past 3 weeks. Tomorrow, they would begin to understand that they hadn't just lost their money. They had lost everything. And the woman they thought was too confused to remember her own name had orchestrated every bit of it while serving them breakfast and asking them sweetly about their day. I smiled as I cleared the dinner dishes, humming the old song I'd been singing the day I overheard their original conversation about my inevitable decline. Some lessons, I reflected, were worth taking time to teach properly. And I was just getting started. The most devastating realizations come not all at once, but one terrible discovery at a time. Sunday morning brought the first crack in their remaining illusion of security. Maggie came downstairs wearing a bathrobe and slippers, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. The stress of their financial ruin was etched in every line of her face, and the lingering effects of weeks of slow poisoning had left her hands shaking as she poured herself coffee. "Mom, have you seen my pearl necklace?" she asked, rifling through her purse. "The one grandmother left me?" I looked up from my crossword puzzle, another part of my performance as the mildly confused but functional elderly woman. "Pearl necklace?"
I'm not sure, dear.
"Did you check your jewelry box?" "I did.
It's not there.
And neither are my diamond earrings or my gold bracelet." Jared appeared in the doorway, looking equally haggard. "What's missing?" "My good jewelry. The expensive pieces. They're not in the jewelry box." "Maybe you moved them," Jared suggested. "Put them somewhere safe and forgot." "I didn't move them. They were there last week when I got dressed for the conservatorship hearing." I watched this exchange with carefully maintained confusion, as if their domestic crisis was beyond my understanding. In reality, I was cataloging every item they mentioned, cross-referencing it with the detailed inventory I'd made of everything I'd replaced with fakes over the past month. Maggie's pearls were currently in a safety deposit box in New Hampshire, along with her diamond earrings and gold bracelet. The items in her jewelry box were expert replicas that had cost me less than $50 each to acquire. "Maybe they're around here somewhere," I suggested helpfully. "Sometimes things get misplaced when people are upset." "Mom, these aren't things that get misplaced. They're valuable pieces that stay in one specific place." "Could someone have stolen them?" Jared asked.
Who?
"The only people who've been in the house are us and Mom." They looked at me with identical expressions of doubt and suspicion. For a moment, I thought they might actually have figured out that the confused old woman they'd been manipulating was capable of far more than they'd imagined. But then Maggie shook her head. "Mom can barely remember to take her medication. There's no way she could plan something like this." "Unless someone else did it," Jared said slowly. "The same person who stole her money. Maybe they've been in the house. How would they get in without us knowing?" "The same way they accessed our bank accounts without us knowing." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds very frightening." "Should we call the police?" "And tell them what?" "That we think the same mysterious person who legally transferred all our money also somehow broke into our house and stole jewelry?" "They'll think we're crazy." Over the next few hours, their search became increasingly frantic. They tore through the house looking for Maggie's missing jewelry, and in the process discovered that several other valuable items had vanished as well. Jared's collection of vintage watches gone, replaced with cheap replicas. The expensive sound system in the living room, replaced with identical-looking equipment that would fall apart the moment anyone tried to use it seriously. The antique vase in the hallway that had belonged to my grandmother, swapped for a convincing fake from a discount home goods store. One by one, they discovered that everything of value they thought they still possessed had been systematically replaced with worthless substitutes. "This is impossible," Maggie kept repeating. "How could someone replace all these things without us noticing?" "Maybe we did notice," Jared said grimly. "Maybe that's why we've been feeling so terrible lately. Maybe whoever did this has been drugging us somehow." I looked up from my knitting with mild interest. "Drugging you? That sounds like something from a movie." "It would explain why we've both been so tired and sick," Maggie said. "And why we didn't notice when our things were being stolen." "But how would someone drug you?" I asked innocently. They looked at each other, then at me, then at the kitchen where I'd been preparing all their meals for the past 3 weeks. For a terrifying moment, I thought they'd made the connection. But then Maggie shook her head again. Mom's been eating the same food we have. If someone was poisoning the food, she'd be sick too. What they didn't know was that I'd been very careful to prepare my own portions separately, mixing the poison only into their servings. What they also didn't know was that I'd built up a tolerance to the specific toxin I'd been using, taking small doses myself over several months to ensure I could handle accidental exposure. Maybe it's something else, Jared suggested. Something in the water or the air conditioning or... They were grasping at straws, desperate to find an explanation that didn't implicate the helpless old woman who'd been their constant companion throughout their ordeal. That afternoon, Vincent called. Mrs. Cole? This is Vincent Marlowe. I hope you're feeling well. I played my part perfectly, letting confusion creep into my voice. Mr. Marlowe? I remember you, don't I? You're the lawyer man. That's right. I was calling to let you know that there's been a development in your case. Some new information has come to light about the theft of your assets. Theft? I sounded appropriately confused. Someone stole from me? Yes, and we may have identified the perpetrators. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and your family to discuss this. Would tomorrow morning work? I think so. Maggie handles my schedule now. Maggie, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, took the phone from me. Mr. Marlowe? This is Maggie Langley. What kind of development? I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you bring your mother to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Of course. But can you give me some idea of what this is about? Let's just say that the investigation into your mother's missing assets has revealed some very interesting connections to your own recent financial difficulties. After Maggie hung up, she and Jared spent the evening speculating about what Vincent might have discovered. Maybe he found out who's been targeting us, Maggie said hopefully. Or maybe he wants to blame us for what happened to your mother's money. Why would he do that? Because we're the obvious suspects. We had motive and opportunity. But we didn't do anything wrong. We were trying to protect her. Try proving that to a lawyer who thinks we stole millions of dollars from a confused old woman. I listened to their anxiety with deep satisfaction. They were finally beginning to understand what it felt like to be helpless victims of someone else's scheme, to have their motives questioned and their honesty doubted. But they still had no idea that their real tormentor was sitting 10 feet away, knitting a sweater and humming softly to herself. That night, as they huddled together on the living room sofa trying to make sense of their situation, I retired to my bedroom and placed a final call to Vincent. Are you ready for tomorrow? I asked. Ready as we can be. Do you want to be there when we reveal the truth? Oh, I'll be there. But not as Marion Cole. What do you mean? I mean it's time for Margaret Collins to make her first public appearance. And for Marion Cole to say her final goodbye. Marion, are you sure about this? Once we reveal what you've done, there will be consequences. Legal ones, probably. And certainly personal ones. Vincent, they spent months planning to lock me away in a care facility so they could steal everything I'd worked for. They discussed whether my death would be more convenient than my recovery. They fed me drugs to make me seem more confused than I was, then used that confusion to have me declared incompetent. I know, but they made their choice when they decided I was worth more to them as a victim than as a mother. Tomorrow, they learn what it costs to make that choice. And after tomorrow? After tomorrow, Marion Cole will be truly dead, and Margaret Collins will be free to live the life she's earned. I hung up the phone and walked to my bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of the property I'd bought with my first big contract 30 years ago. Tomorrow, my daughter would learn that the confused, helpless woman she'd been manipulating was actually the architect of her complete destruction. Tomorrow, she would understand that the mother she'd thought was losing her mind had been playing a game far more sophisticated than she could have imagined. Tomorrow, The student would finally meet her teacher. And the lesson would be one she'd remember for the rest of her life. The most perfect justice is when your enemies destroy themselves with their own weapons. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of autumn rain that makes everything look bleak and unforgiving. Perfect weather for what I had planned. Maggie and Jared were both nervous wrecks as we prepared to leave for Vincent's office. They'd spent the night alternating between hope that he'd found their tormentor and fear that he was about to accuse them of crimes they hadn't committed. "Mom, are you sure you're feeling up to this?" Maggie asked as she helped me into my coat. "You seem tired." "I'm fine, dear," I replied with a wan smile. "Just a little confused about why we're going to see the lawyer man again. He thinks he knows who stole your money. And ours." "That's good," I said vaguely. "I hope they catch the bad person." The drive to Vincent's office was conducted in tense silence. Maggie kept checking her appearance in the mirror, while Jared drummed his fingers nervously on the steering wheel. They both looked terrible, pale, thin, and exhausted from weeks of poisoning and stress. I, on the other hand, felt better than I had in months. Today was the culmination of everything I'd been working toward, the moment when all my careful planning would finally pay off. Vincent's secretary showed us into the conference room, where Vincent was waiting with another woman I didn't recognize, a tall, elegant lady with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. "Mrs. Cole," Vincent said formally, "thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet my colleague, Margaret Collins. She's been instrumental in investigating the theft of your assets." I looked at the woman with polite confusion. "Miss Collins? Have we met before?" "Not exactly," she replied with a slight smile. "But I feel like I know you very well." Maggie and Jared settled into chairs across from Vincent's desk, their anxiety palpable. "Mr. Marlowe," Maggie began, "you said you had information about who stole our money." "Indeed I do. And I think you'll find it quite illuminating." Vincent opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across his desk. "Over the past month, I've been investigating the systematic theft of assets from both Marion Cole and her family members," he began. "What I discovered was a sophisticated scheme involving identity theft, financial fraud, and psychological manipulation." "We knew it," Jared said triumphantly. "Someone was targeting all of us." "Yes," Vincent agreed. "Someone was indeed targeting you. Someone who had intimate knowledge of your financial situation, your daily routines, and your personal vulnerabilities." He picked up a document from his desk. "For instance, the person who stole from you knew exactly when you would be out of the house, allowing them to replace your valuable possessions with worthless fakes. They knew your banking information, your passwords, your security questions. They knew your favorite foods, your daily schedules, your deepest fears." Maggie frowned. "That sounds like someone we know personally." "Exactly," Vincent said. "Someone you trusted completely. Someone who had access to your home, your personal information, and your daily lives." The color drained from Maggie's face. "You're not suggesting that we—" "Oh no," Vincent interrupted. "I'm not suggesting you stole from yourselves. I'm telling you that someone very close to you orchestrated this entire scheme." He turned to another document. "The person who did this spent months planning their revenge. They liquidated assets, transferred funds to offshore accounts, established false identities, and created elaborate shell corporations. They slowly poisoned you with a mild toxin that clouded your judgment and weakened your physical condition. They systematically replaced your valuable possessions with fakes while you were too sick to notice." "But who?" Maggie demanded. "Who could have done all that?" Vincent looked directly at me. "Mrs. Cole, would you like to tell them, or shall I?" I blinked at him in confusion. "Tell them what?" "About your remarkable recovery from dementia. About your new identity as Margaret Collins. About the months you spent planning and executing the most sophisticated revenge scheme I've ever encountered." The silence in the room was absolute. Maggie looked back and forth between Vincent and me, her mouth open in shock. What is he talking about, Mom? I stood up slowly, walked around the conference table, and sat down next to Margaret Collins. Hello, Maggie, I said in my normal voice, clear, strong, and completely lucid. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Margaret Collins, and I've been investigating the systematic abuse of an elderly woman named Marion Cole. Maggie's face went white as death. Mom, Marion Cole suffered from a condition called family exploitation. I continued calmly. Her own daughter and son-in-law conspired to have her declared mentally incompetent so they could steal her life's work. They discussed whether her death would be more convenient than her survival. They fed her unnecessary medication to increase her confusion. They lied to doctors and lawyers about her mental state. This isn't real, Jared whispered. This can't be real. Oh, it's very real, I assured him. Would you like to hear the recordings? Vincent activated a digital player on his desk. Suddenly the room was filled with Maggie and Jared's voices from that first fateful phone call. She forgot to hang up again. Mom's such a dinosaur with technology. You think she even knows what day it is? Just give it time. Once she's... Well, we can put the company up for sale. 2 million split between us? Easy street, babe. 2 mil. Not bad for a little patience. Patience and a handful of pills. Maggie covered her face with her hands as her own laughter echoed through the conference room. We have hours of recordings, I continued conversationally. Every cruel comment, every casual dismissal of my humanity, every calculation about my death, all preserved for posterity. You were pretending, Maggie said through her fingers. All this time, you were pretending to be confused. I was protecting myself from people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. But the disappearance, the search parties, theater, designed to make you panic and reveal your true motives, which you did beautifully. Vincent picked up another document. During Mrs. Cole's supposed disappearance, her assets were legally transferred to various entities controlled by Margaret Collins. The coal industries was dissolved and its assets distributed to shell corporations. The farmhouse was transferred to a private trust. Every account was emptied and the funds moved offshore. You stole from us, Jared accused, his voice shaking with rage. I reclaimed what was mine, I corrected. And I liberated you from the burden of waiting for my death. You wanted me gone, so you could have my money. Well, now I'm gone, and the money is gone with me. But you can't just... We're your family. Family? I laughed coldly. Family doesn't plot to institutionalize each other for financial gain. Family doesn't poison each other. Family doesn't celebrate each other's mental decline. We never poisoned you. No. But I poisoned you. For weeks. Every breakfast, every dinner, every loving meal I prepared while you discussed my inevitable demise. How does it feel to be the victim of someone you trusted? Maggie was crying now, real tears of devastation and betrayal. We were trying to help you. You were trying to help yourselves. And now you have what you wanted. I'm gone. And you're free to live your lives without the burden of caring for an aging parent. Without any money to live those lives, Jared added bitterly. Money you never earned and never deserved, I replied. You gambled everything on inheriting wealth you hadn't worked for. You lost. That's what happens when you bet against someone who's smarter than you are. Vincent cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Mrs. Cole, or should I say Miss Collins, has decided to press charges for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Charges. Maggie looked up in horror. What charges? You systematically abused an elderly woman, lied to medical professionals about her condition, filed false legal documents claiming she was incompetent, and attempted to steal her assets through fraudulent conservatorship proceedings. But she wasn't really incompetent. No, but you believed she was. And you acted on that belief to exploit what you thought was a vulnerable person. The law doesn't care that your victim was smarter than you assumed. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray morning. Maggie, you asked me once if I remembered building coal industries. I remember everything. Every late night, every difficult client, every small victory that built into something significant. I remember teaching you to ride a bicycle and helping you with your homework and paying for your college education. I turned back to face her. I also remember the day you decided that your inheritance was more important than my life. And I remember promising myself that you would learn what it feels like to lose everything to someone you underestimated. So what happens now? She asked quietly. Now you face the consequences of your choices. You'll be arrested, tried, and probably convicted. You'll lose what little you have left paying for legal representation. You'll spend the next several years in prison, thinking about what you threw away. And you? I'll be living comfortably under my new identity, enjoying the fruits of the labor you tried to steal. I'll be reading books, traveling, maybe even dating. Living the life I was supposed to have before you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. Margaret Collins gathered her papers and stood up. The authorities will be here shortly to arrest you both. I suggest you use the time to think about the choices you made and the prices you're now going to pay for them. As we prepared to leave, Maggie called out one last time.
Mom, I'm sorry. I really am sorry.
I paused at the door and looked back at her. This woman who had once been my little girl, who had grown into someone capable of such casual cruelty toward the person who loved her most. I'm sorry too, Maggie. I'm sorry you became the kind of person who could do what you did. And I'm sorry it took losing everything for you to remember how to feel remorse. Can you forgive me? I considered the question seriously. Could I forgive the daughter who had plotted my institutionalization, who had laughed about my supposed mental decline, who had discussed whether my death would be more convenient than my survival? Forgiveness is something you'll have to earn, I said finally. And from prison with no money and no prospects, that's going to be very difficult indeed. I walked out of Vincent's office as Margaret Collins, leaving Marion Cole behind forever. Behind me, I could hear Maggie sobbing as the police sirens grew closer. Justice, I reflected, had a very satisfying sound. The sweetest victory is the life you build from the ashes of those who tried to destroy you. 6 months later, I sat on the deck of my new home overlooking Lake Champlain, sipping morning coffee and reading the newspaper. The house was smaller than my old farmhouse, but infinitely more peaceful. No ghosts of betrayal haunted these rooms. No echoes of calculated cruelty disturbed my sleep. Margaret Collins had built a good life for herself. The legal proceedings had unfolded exactly as Vincent predicted. Maggie and Jared were convicted of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Maggie received 4 years in federal prison. Jared got 6, since he'd been the primary architect of their financial schemes. Their remaining assets were seized to pay legal fees and victim restitution, though of course there was no victim to receive it, since Marion Cole's estate was essentially empty. The irony was perfect. They'd lost everything trying to steal from someone who had already made sure there was nothing left to steal. I'd followed the trial from a distance, watching the news coverage with the detached interest of someone observing a cautionary tale about greed and family betrayal. The reporters painted them as tragic figures who'd been driven to desperation by their mother's declining mental health, but the recorded evidence of their conversations made their true motives impossible to deny. Local woman sentenced in elder abuse case had been the headline in the Burlington paper. Below it was a photo of Maggie being led away in handcuffs, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd once planned to inherit millions. I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, but I felt no regret either. She'd made her choices with full knowledge of what she was doing. Now she was living with the consequences. My phone rang, interrupting my morning meditation. It was Vincent, calling with his monthly update on various legal and financial matters. Good morning, Margaret. How's retirement treating you? Wonderfully. I've taken up watercolor painting, and I'm thinking about getting a dog. A dog sounds perfect. You always did love animals. How are things proceeding with the foundation? The Marion Cole Foundation for Elder Protection is fully operational. We've helped 43 families this year deal with financial exploitation, and we've lobbied successfully for stronger legal protections for elderly victims. The foundation had been my final gift to the woman I used to be. Using the assets I'd recovered from Maggie and Jared's accounts, I'd established an organization dedicated to helping other elderly people avoid the fate I'd narrowly escaped. It seemed fitting that their greed would fund protections for future victims. Any word from our former adversaries? Maggie writes to you occasionally. The letters are forwarded to my office, per your instructions. What does she say? The usual. Apologies, regrets, requests for forgiveness. She claims to have found religion in prison. How convenient for her. Should I continue forwarding them unopened, or would you like me to read and summarize them? I considered this. Part of me was curious about Maggie's state of mind, whether prison had truly changed her or whether she was simply looking for any angle that might lead to reconciliation and financial support. Continue forwarding them unopened, I decided. If she has something truly important to say, she can say it to a judge when she applies for early parole. And Jared? Has he written?
No.
His lawyer says he's focused on serving his time quietly and staying out of trouble. Jared, at least, seemed to understand that his bridges were permanently burned. There was a kind of honesty in that acceptance that I could almost respect. After the call, I walked down to the lake shore and sat on the small dock I'd had built behind the house. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the mountains that rose on the far side of the lake. A family of loons called to each other from somewhere out on the water, their voices haunting and beautiful. This was the life I'd earned through 30 years of hard work and careful planning. Not the life that had been handed to me, not the life I'd inherited, but the life I'd built with my own hands and protected with my own intelligence. Thank you for staying with me through Marion's incredible journey of transformation and triumph. If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you that you're stronger than anyone who's ever underestimated you, if it showed you that intelligence and patience can overcome even the deepest betrayal, then you understand why I share these stories. This is what Her True Stories is all about. Real people who refused to be victims, who turned their pain into power, who proved that sometimes the best revenge is a life so well lived that your enemies become irrelevant. Don't just listen and leave. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Every week, we bring you tales of ordinary people who discovered extraordinary strength when pushed too far. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew you? How did you prove them wrong? Your story might be the next one we share. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own power. We all know people who've been written off, dismissed, or betrayed by those they trusted most. Sometimes all it takes is one story to remind them that their chapter isn't over, it's just beginning. Remember, you are more resilient than your hardest day, more intelligent than your biggest mistake, and more powerful than anyone who has ever tried to diminish you. Until next time, keep writing your own story of triumph. The world needs to see what happens when unstoppable meets unbreakable, and that person is you. This is Her True Stories, and your story matters.